Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world. With self-care strategies from Chinese medicine, functional medicine, Ayurveda, neuroscience, and beyond. I'm your host, Brody Welch, a licensed acupuncturist and transformation catalyst, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Welcome to today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in to A Healthy Curiosity. I'm your host, Brody Welch, and we are coming up on, as I record this today, the end of a uniquely challenging year, especially perhaps for kids and teenagers whose normal outlets for socializing have been disrupted during the pandemic, where school and the future might be, well, to say the least, not a normal, typical year. This episode is going to be a must listen if you are a parent or really anyone who has a human body who might be feeling any kind of stress, distress, or anxiety. We're going to be talking about a body-centered approach to mental health, especially for kids and teenagers. My guest today is Roseann Capanna-Hodge. She's a mental health trailblazer who founded the Global Health Institute of Children's Mental Health. She is a media expert who is changing the way we view and treat children's mental health. She is the author of several books: the Teletherapy Toolkit for Child and Adolescent Therapists, the It's Gonna Be Okay, and the Get Unstuck program book, which are resources for parents to reverse their children's symptoms. She's been featured on dozens of media outlets. She's worked with thousands of people with really challenging conditions, anxiety, ADHD, mood disorders, on and on. And I am really excited to dive into somatic therapies and how we can apply them to help the young people in our world. Roseann, welcome to A Healthy Curiosity.
Well, thanks for having me, Brody. I'm pretty excited to be here because I know you spend a lot of time supporting people in understanding how stress and anxiety and just all the hurdles that we have in life impact our brain and body. So this is an honor to be here.
I am delighted to have you because really there are so many pathways that we can take to feeling better. And usually, like my first go-to when anyone is dealing with stress or anxiety is to work with the breath, because it's
Mhm.
certainly the fastest way that we have to affect our nervous system and can tell our bodies that the emergency is no longer happening. Can you describe, just first off, why this is such an important tool?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, you said it. It is really the quickest way that we have to get our nervous system to regulate and go into what I call, the chill out, hot tub, parasympathetic state. And when we are activated and our breath gets irregular and we start chest breathing, we are much more likely to be in what I call that stress hyperactivation state, in that sympathetic dominant state. And you don't have to go into full flight, fight, or freeze mode. You can live in this sort of semi activated state when we are stressed out. So, breath work not only is something that is a resource for when you are stressed, but it is something that we can use daily to help keep our nervous system down into what I call that idle state, closer to the regulated parasympathetic state. And it's so important because the more we live in a stress state, the more we're activated. And so the more we're in a chill out state, the less our body reacts. So it's so important that the breath puts us, not only calms our nervous system, but ideally it's the first part of connecting with our body. And as you're well aware of, what an automatic process in a stress state is, that we kind of want to disconnect from our bodies. It's like it's what happens when people take psych meds. There's a disconnection that happens. And for some people, they get almost like a sense that there's a relief from disconnecting. But in the long term, it harms us, right? Because the further we get from connecting to ourselves, then we don't understand the alerts because our body is always alerting us to things that are positive and negative, and it gives us those somatic cues to take care of ourselves. And it's just so important to practice breath work because it's you're literally connecting and rooting. And when you do that on the regular, you're really able to repel the stress, but also pay attention to those signals that come through so that you can take care of yourself.
I appreciate that you are talking about it as being this gateway to connecting with the body, because it really is just noticing where you're breathing and trying to get the breath in qigong. It's all about, well, and obviously with to get ourselves out of the domain of the chest and down into the low abdomen, getting the breath to be deeper in the body gets us to be grounded and centered, and that requires tuning in. It requires tuning in to know where the breath is happening so that we can sort of take the reins and gently steer it into a deeper, smoother, calmer, slower, more even state.
Yeah. And, as you said, Brody, the other part about breath work too is like so many people are chest breathers. And people are like, yeah, so we're not designed to be chest breathers. We're designed to breathe into our belly. And that diaphragmatic breathing supports so many things in our system, like our organs, including our brain. And but it is really that grounding that helps you to get comfortable in your body. And again, it's a natural response to sort of disconnect when we're really, really stressed. But when we disconnect and disconnect and disconnect, which we are becoming a very disconnected society for a lot of reasons, we're stress avoiding, we're having dissociative states on devices. But when we disconnect, basically we are, particularly when you're distressed, we are shoving down emotions and we are not processing them. And they will creep up and bite you in the tuchus if you don't address them. This is our subconscious is always in control. And things like breath work and somatic experiencing and qigong and meditation, these things are tools to help regulate our nervous system, connect to our body, and help us process information.
You mentioned that it's important for us to process our emotions, and that stress and being like, spending all our day on screens, or that just and spending our day, our time mainly in our heads and not necessarily paying
Mhm.
attention to the body, that keeps us from doing that. And yet, for a lot of people, the notion of quote unquote processing our emotions is a confusing one. People who have been taught to just kind of power through and take care of business without really paying attention to what's been going on under the surface in their hearts as a human being, the flows of energy that we call emotions in the body. Is there a body-centered way that you help people to clue in to just simply allow the processing of emotions to take place?
Yeah, I mean, such a great question. And so I believe, and just so everybody knows, I believe in a up approach to mental health. I believe that everything starts with the body and then you can do the cognitive work. The bulk of psychotherapy is to start with cognitive and then try to get people to connect with the body. That's not how the brain works. We are only in a conscious awareness state 5 to 0.05% of the time. So our subconscious is running the show, and a lot of that is through the body and the sensations we experience, right? So where does it start? There's a lot of I'll go through your questions, and it starts with connecting the sensations our body gives us with feelings, right? So we have a range of feelings. We don't just feel anxious, even though we may be feeling anxious right now. We could, feel sadness and grief and being scared. And there's lots of little different feelings. And so when we learn to get into our body and feel comfortable and grounded in our body, And then, particularly for children, I mean, you're never too old to do this. But when you then cue kids with the words that go with those sensations, they start to become very, very self regulated and aware of those cues that come in. And that's the first part. So we want to separate feelings from the cognitive thought, right? Like, this is what I think, right? But thinking and feeling and sensations are all connected, right? And they're just different ways. And so when we try, it doesn't even matter why talking about kids, we try with adults, right? And so we do somatic experiencing, who's, the guru is Peter Levine, and anybody who wants to do deeper work, I really recommend listening to him. And he's very masterful. And I think that there's some type of energy transference when he works with people that's kind of hard to describe until you see him. But when we work with adults who are traumatized, often people do this kind of work, but it really shouldn't just be what I've learned, Brody, with my experience. I work with really challenging cases. I mean, I work with people with Lyme disease and kids with pandas and kids with psychosis and all different kinds of things. But I also work with, anxiety and depression and all those, and kids are really complex today. But when we find treatments that work for the hardest cases, boy, they're even more effective for cases where people are on the spectrum of anxiety, right? So the low level versus the crippled, right? And most people have functional mental health issues. Most people are not completely disabled by their mental health issues. They're walking around, they're working, they're going to school, they're having relationships, they're just struggling, right? They're stuck and they're struggling. So when we teach people to connect to those thoughts, those feelings, and the body part, they're able to understand what's coming to them and take a moment and deal with them and process it, because it's really critical. We're trying to avoid uncomfortableness. 1 in 4 people in the United States is on a psychiatric medication. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of people.
Yeah, we're not a we're not a particularly well-adjusted culture right now. There is
No, and it's not, we are, I've been doing mental health for almost 30 years, and we are not more emotionally better. I love that there's way more people into holistic. Like, I've been doing this for 30 years. 30 years ago, when I was talking, forget about it. I don't feel like my field in mental health has come very far when I listen to, not when I listen to, but I'm in a Facebook group, and there's several thousand therapists in there, and there's a whole discussion about how therapists should never ever talk about what you should eat with a client. And I
which is
thought,
so insane, because we
so
know
insane.
that what we eat absolutely affects our minds and
Of
affects our
course.
mood. Yeah.
And they were like, we're not qualified. And it was like, beg to differ, because,
Right.
I'm duly certified. I mean, I got certified just because you have to legally protect yourself, but I've been doing
Sure.
this for 30 years. But this is the kind of dialogue that goes on, and people are, everybody who's here is listening, you're pushed to medication, which doesn't have a lot of efficacy, nor is it, it's even just from a common sense approach. I mean, our mental health stats are skyrocketing. Anxiety has surpassed depression as the number one mental health issue. I mean, like, when you look at the stress, 50% of kids at school are stressed on a daily basis. I mean, that's pre-COVID.
Yeah.
So getting people to understand those alert signals and then employ strategies to address them are really, really helpful. And part of the somatic experiencing and understanding where your body is creating a window of tolerance. So understanding, what is my tolerance level, right? Like, here's a great example. I used the COVID quarantine period. I call it my Corona creative period. I did a lot of cool things. I wrote 4 books. I made a course. I mean, I did a lot more than that. It was kind of intense. And I was driving in my car, and I was like, oh my goodness, I am chest breathing. I haven't been chest breathing in 20 years. And I was like, I am totally jacked up. Now, you forget that even good things make you anxious and can build in your system. And so I had to really actually instill and conscientiously really practicing my breath. Not that I wasn't practicing it before, but now my breath has gotten out of the clinically, where I feel good. So I have to watch it. And so I paid attention to my body signals. I wasn't even recognizing that I was stressed because I was like, oh, I'm doing so many fun things. It's so cool. It's productive. But it doesn't matter. My body was experiencing stress.
I'd love for you to get a little granular about what kind of body signals you're thinking about or that you encourage people to focus on. Could you give us some examples that are perhaps not breath related?
Sure, absolutely. So first of all, when somebody comes in on a clinical level and somebody's experiencing the classic things, looping thoughts, intrusive thoughts, obsessive thinking, sadness, low motivation, all those different symptoms that are related to depression, anxiety, OCD, the most common things that people face. So, what each person experience in terms of body sensation can be different. And what I like to say is, in somebody listening and you're experiencing distress, put your hand where you're feeling your stress. And that will be different for each person. So, for one person, it might be jaw pain. Another person, it could be a headache, or it could be tightening of your feet. I mean, there's just so many different ways, but it tends to be muscular. It tends to be that tenseness that's held in a certain place in the body. It could be nausea. There is obviously a negative body sensation,
Yeah,
right?
tenseness anywhere, and from a Chinese medicine standpoint, is qi stagnation, and obviously, if you're in a sympathetic emergency mode state, your muscles are going to be tight so that you can fight or flee, and or stay rigid and
Yes.
freeze, and so there's going to be very likely when you are feeling tense, you're feeling tight, and that is both a mental and a physical sensation at the same time.
Absolutely. And, and stagnation is a perfect word because as people would come to see you, Brody, and say, I have pain here, right? I mean, I've never met somebody with chronic pain that didn't have an activated nervous system. Whether it was the chicken or the egg because they got into an accident and then they're getting good treatment and it won't resolve, right? Because of the high stress levels at that point, right? So, but yeah, there's a pain point, and sometimes people experience chronic pain syndrome where it's all over. But most of the time, it can even be an ache in your heart. It can be that lump in your throat. I mean, there's just so many sensations that are so unique to people. I mean, I've even had people who've experienced trauma have psychosomatic seizures where it's not a seizure, but it is. It's not a clinical seizure, but they keep having seizures because of a trauma. There's just so many ways that things can show up in that body, and that is our alert system, right? For myself, if I get extremely worried, which my point of stress is different, like I take care of myself, and I'm also such a glass half full person that I don't experience stress in the same way because I'm always like, okay, what's the solution? But if I'm really distressed, which is typically related to one of my kids, right? I have nausea. That's my body sensation. So then I'm like, wait a second, what's going on? What do I got to do? And when you get really cued in to what you're saying, what your body is saying, you learn to pull out your toolkit. And I think that's what's so different. And also in a psychotherapy session too, Brody, when we take the top down approach and we're just talking about things, what people don't realize, both the client and the clinician, is you're actually creating an activation. So when we jump into talk without a grounding and helping a person to understand what's happening in their body, we actually contribute to their distress.
That makes a lot of sense, right? People often don't want to talk about something because it's painful and difficult and stressful, and they leave therapy sessions feeling wiped out and exhausted and like,
Yes.
I think this is good for me, but at the moment they feel almost re-traumatized.
And they are re-traumatized because what you have to do, and that doesn't mean you don't do talk therapy. Absolutely, you do talk therapy, but you have to regulate that nervous system first before you do that. And the way our system is set up is it's like, oh, take a pill and you'll chill out. But the pills almost never work. And then you try to do therapy. And then people go, I'm going to just stay on my pill. I'm not going to therapy. Like it, you never get a resolution.
You, yes, you are worth caring for. I hope you know that. And I hope you're acting on it. Are you taking care of yourself in a way that you'd want someone you love to take care of themselves? If not, I can help you up your self-care, self-love, and self-respect game. Picture yourself making time for your joy, honoring your body, letting your heart lead for a while. How good does that feel? I would love to help you align with your heart and your power to operate from a place of grounded, centered, and abundant energy rather than stress and depletion. My coaching superpowers include smart strategy, insight, and deep compassion. I will help you embody self-respect and self-love so your light can shine brighter. I have room on my calendar for just a handful of private coaching clients in 2021. So if your heart is crying out for some support, now is the time to head to brodywelch.com/about and apply. That's brodywelch.com, Brody with an IE and Welch with a CH. Now back to the show. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Chinese medicine take on what you just said about nausea, that when we think about the organ system in Chinese medicine that's supposed to regulate the free flow of energy in the body, we're thinking about the liver with a capital L.
Yes.
So the liver is all about there being ease and free flow in the body. And so, and since every organ system affects every other, like the liver is the mother of the heart and it's the controller, it keeps the digestive system in check. So when there's too much energy in the liver, for some people, that energy pent up in the liver system will kind of flare up and attack the heart and give someone palpitations or insomnia. For someone else, like you, it is moving across sort of our five-pointed star that we draw for a five-element theory in Chinese medicine. We're moving from the liver to the stomach, and so that excess energy from the liver attacks the stomach, and you get something like nausea. Or if it attacks what we can call the spleen, the rest of the digestive system, you could get something like irritable bowel syndrome or constipation or diarrhea or that kind of thing. If the liver qi is stagnant and in excess, it can actually rebel against the organ that's supposed to control it, which is the lungs, and give us a cough or lower our immune system. It can also drain from the organ that's supposed to nourish it, which is the kidney system. And so that's going to be the adrenals. It could be libido. It could show up as PMS. It could show up as fertility issues. It could show up as like neurogenic bladder, or like all sorts of things that are kind of nervous system related, but it really can affect anywhere in the body. So just a lot of times when I'm working with someone and I'll ask them like where they feel their stress in their body or how does it show up, sometimes they say they don't know, but then I've got this whole like checklist of physical symptoms, and there's like systems checked off all over the place. And so it's like, okay, you don't know how this is showing up, but this piece of paper with all these check marks on it is like giving me some pretty good clues as to how that might be manifesting.
Brody, and that's why we say touch where it is in your body, because your subconscious is going to touch it.
Awesome. So you can really harness that power. Even if someone doesn't think they know, you just say like, go for it. Like just try.
And you know, when you're activated, I mean, listen, I'm dealing with activated people. I mean, you know, your thinking is the way that, you know, as you fight, flight, or freeze. In that activated state, your frontal lobes stop working or get really lousy. You're not able to regulate your thinking in the same way. It's not as easy. That's just biology. That's just what happens. So as we disconnect, right, you know, many times teenagers will tell me, this happened to me like 3 times this week. It's only Wednesday, where I asked a teenager who was anxious and depressed, right? Because it's, you know, you get anxious for a long time, your body's going to get depressed. And then, you know, we call it clinical depression, but it's depression because you're worn out from anxiety is really what it is most of the time. They all said the same thing. I said, do you have a sense? I could tell, I do QEG brain maps. And so you can see exactly what is going on in the brain. And we know, as you're well aware, we know exactly what the brain does. So there's no guessing like, oh, is this ADD? Oh, is this? No, the brain map shows you, it's pretty clear cut. So then I make a lot of questions based on neuroscience. And so often in these three cases, because it was so obvious, I said, do you actually almost feel like you're looking at yourself? Like you're disconnected? And they were like, yes. And each one of them talked about an experience of just being so highly distressed that they had to try to disconnect. Otherwise, it was too painful. And the more we do that, which is a natural response, there's a way to unwind that, right? It's connecting through the body. Breath work is the start of that, and then really connecting to those sensations, and then using other things like qigong and acupuncture and EFT tapping, and so somatic experiencing and neurofeedback. There's many ways to get there, and they're all great, right? But when we connect, we are able to process and move through. And when we disconnect, all we do is further deepen the issue.
I am curious about I'm imagining, first of all, a kid who is maybe they have ADD, maybe they have difficulty concentrating and they're agitated, they're anxious. Trying to get them to do a breathing exercise, in my experience, is darn near impossible. Is there a way,
Yeah.
like, how do you get kids who just want to escape their bodies or escape the moment in general to, for example, understand that they can calm themselves down with their breath? Like, how do you talk to, let's say, an elementary school kid
Yeah.
about their
I
breath?
always feel like elementary school kids are so darn easy because they're so used to just following along. You know what I mean? So, and then
Yeah. Mhm.
there's different ways. But first of all, I believe in teaching everybody about the brain. So when we teach people about the brain, kids, their parents, adults, understanding what is going on with you is so incredibly powerful. It really helps to take away the shame and embarrassment that almost everybody feels with a mental health issue because, that's what we do, right? We say people are crazy and this and that. We also say, oh, it's biochemical or genetic and oh, there's nothing you can do. Well, that's baloney on a lot of levels. And on both that it's only biochemical and there's nothing you can do. That's just not true. So when we teach kids about the brain, they start to understand and teach them that guess what? These are the ways to hack in. And I always start with even the most resistant kid. When I say to them, like, oh boy, this kind of feels lousy, doesn't it? Oh yeah. Well, you don't want to keep feeling like that. The answer is always, of course not. Well, let's try these things. And so starting with that is really helpful. Now, sometimes people are so distressed, I don't start with breath. What I start with is connecting to a body sensation and in keeping things really, really, not jumping ahead, right? So sometimes this work with people who've experienced this for a long time, and particularly people with trauma. And trauma can be a lot of things, just for people to understand. It could be medical trauma, it could be bullying. It doesn't have to be that you were physically or sexually or emotionally abused. There's a lot more in the world that happens that gets stuck in your system. So I
Well,
think that
and more, like, it seems to me like almost anything that we don't make time to process could be sort of a buildup of sort of maybe lesser traumas, but you get enough of them, if you're habitually checked out, then you've got a backlog to deal with.
exactly. You have a backlog that is overwhelming. And again, another reason to be like, oh, that's a mountain. I don't want to do it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so, when we address things as they come in, right? What's sort of happening for kids, and it's being led by their parents, is that, we've become a culture of we don't want to experience anything bad. We don't want to experience anything uncomfortable. And we have a big range of emotions. And like I said, I couldn't be a more positive person, right? I'm very sunny. I'm always like, okay, we're going to get through this. And it doesn't mean I don't experience those emotions. I just take a moment and I process them, and then I move through them. And so, we want to, kids are very helicoptered. They're not independent. They're not allowed to have failures. People are very much catastrophizing and worrying about every kid's future. And there's a lot of pressure on kids today for a lot. I think, anybody who's a parent is like, yes, Roseann, kids are expected like to be a straight A student. We were not expected to be straight A students. I know I wasn't. And it was okay. And now we've sort of, these kids just have, again, a lot of pressure. And so because we are making or have an expectation of like just the utmost perfection and good manners and all these things for kids, we don't want our kids to experience distress. And so their level of resiliency and stress tolerance is one of the most noticeable differences in kids today, that they don't seem to have experience with failures or uncomfortableness. So they're more easily dysregulated.
So say a kid is in that situation that
Yep.
this is a new experience for them, right? This is
Yep.
which is of course a growth opportunity,
Exactly.
and being able to, but it certainly doesn't feel like it at the time, and that's certainly not a very empathetic thing to say to a kid. Well, like, oh, this is good for you, it builds character.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what is an important skill in terms of helping to that person to increase that window of tolerance for feeling bad, of like feeling like they've
Yeah.
failed?
So that's that when, like, so helping a person, once you start to get back, reconnect to your body, and you understand what is your body's window of tolerance. Like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm choking right now. Well, we know that's outside of your window of tolerance. But what happened right before then, right? So a lot of times when we feel any distress, we feel like, we go into that sympathetic mode, that prepare for war mode. And so once we get that body to tune in and understand there are nuances, we don't have to react the same way, right? The body doesn't have to react that same way. We can be more connected. There's so many sayings in the world, like, oh, that person made the hair stand up in the back of my neck. Like those are signals, right? Just in so many ways to get kids. Like I know I was very empowered to be very independent, like incredibly independent as a child, even way more so than my peers in the 70s and 80s, right? And it was pretty amazing. And then I went to college and people try to put limits on me, and I was like, I didn't grow up with limits. You're not going to put limits on me, and I mean limits in not dysfunctional limits, but like believing that I could do what I want, and still a lot of gender stuff. And so when kids are empowered, and I made mistakes, and my parents were like, okay, like they were like, all right, pick up, go on. So how do we teach kids to make mistakes? So first of all, you talk to them and you're like, hey, listen, you're going to go to this soccer game, you're not going to win every game. And that's just how it is. This is learning. And you're going to be okay with about it. You're not going to cry. I'm not going to yell at the coach. I don't care what Mr. Smith does because he screams at the ref. This is an opportunity for you to have fun and learn about the game, and nobody's going to win everything. And you don't have one-time conversations with kids. This is by leading by example. This is by having conversations. And some kids have things that are harder for them. I have a child who's dyslexic, who is a really easygoing kid, like a 99.999 percentile easygoing kid. But when stuff with language processing and reading comes up, he can break down. And he will vocalize it's not fair that I have to have a tutor twice a week and things like that. And it's an ongoing discussion. And he's had to learn how to tolerate being uncomfortable when he's so comfortable in everything else. It feels almost worse for him. And I even said that to him yesterday. He's, now 10. And I'm like, look, you're so adorable. Everybody loves you. You're so pleasant. You get along with everybody. You're so helpful, but this is hard for you and you don't like it." And he's like, "I don't."
So you're giving all sorts of positive feedback and you're honoring the fact that this is challenging
Yes.
and normalizing the fact that nobody can do everything.
Nobody can do everything. And I talked to him about, my challenges. Like I'm terrible, like truly terrible in math, undiagnosed learning disability math for sure. And I also am like, hey, mom didn't just get a doctorate. Like she had to go to school for 9 years, like you got to work. So he needs to understand that. Like we are a quick fix, get everything done kind of society. Everybody's used to instantaneous gratification. And so there's so many legs to this, right? So there's the part of building stress tolerance, but it's also to realize that sometimes things take work. I mean, every intake I do, I have to explain to parents that this didn't happen overnight in terms of reversing and reducing their mental health issues, and that we have to unwind it. And they're like, "Okay, but how long do you think it's going to take?" They say the same thing every time. Like there's this, I need an immediacy kind of thing. And certainly when a child is distressed, I mean, I understand that, right? But these are never easy cases. These are things that sometimes people, like the person I had, one of the people I had in the last week, in and out of psych hospital, only 15 years old. So you can't expect somebody to get better in 3 months.
Right. And a lot of times when we're talking about, I think even as adults, having an ongoing practice of connecting to the body and to the breath is super important. I don't know where I would be without connecting to my breath and my body every single morning before doing almost anything else. It's like, and I've been doing this since I was a kid for the most part,
Yeah.
with the exception of college, where I basically use my body to prop up my head. I feel like I've always been interested in embodied consciousness and how to work with it. But it's the kind of thing where like a lot of times, like for example, college, a time where there is all this pressure to like what you were saying with your writing your 4 books
Oh,
earlier
it
this
felt
year.
just like college, Brody.
Yeah, I can empathize with that, being in kind of a hyper productive
Mm-hmm.
time where you're spending more time online, you're spending more time writing, more time in your head, and it maybe goes by the wayside to do the things that we need to do to take care of our bodies. Is there something that you recommend to college kids, that is maybe a practice that they could do regularly, that
Yeah.
is quick, that helps them to stay connected to their bodies?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I want to honor one of the things that you said in that these are things we need to do every day. So I wish I could say to you, okay, so Roseanne's done like thousands of sessions of neurofeedback, biofeedback, and PMF. Okay, I do PMF every day, 7 days a week, at least one time a day now. So you need to take 10 minutes a day to regulate your breath and your body. And so there's lots of ways to do it. So what are some really easy things? So college kids like tools and devices. They like technology. So a great piece of technology, two pieces. One is to use a meditation app like Calm and Headspace. These are great. They're easy. I'm a huge fan of progressive meditations, which are meditations that are guided by a voice. And typically they walk you through tensing and releasing your body and doing breath work. And I love the sleep ones because they're so easy. You can turn it on and you can use it to help you go to sleep. And we know meditation, 10 minutes or more a day after 30 days actually produces changes in the brain.
Love it. Yeah, and really for so many people, it's simply a habit that their brains go into rumination or negative thoughts or
Yes,
beating themselves up, and that's the kind of
100%.
thing that you actually it's I when I work with clients on this, that they are surprised and delighted that you can throw down new neural pathways, and the more that you walk them, the more that they
Absolutely.
become hardwired, and that becomes the automatic
Yeah,
state. And it doesn't take forever.
it doesn't.
It doesn't take 20 years, that you can do it and consistently over time, like water carving a river into the earth, right? It's like there's
Yeah.
just every time. with
And
every
that's
drop.
often so surprising to Brody that, like, in terms of mental health, like, people don't realize they think I take a pill and it makes it better. Even if you respond to the pill, meaning you don't feel as anxious, it's the behavioral changes, it's the new learning that has to occur that really change how you are. And so we neglect that part of things, right? So that daily practice of quieting the mind and putting in another thought to the rumination. I mean, my gosh, I mean, people are ruminators like it's nobody's business. I mean, we're so tough on ourselves. The other piece of technology I love is probably something you're familiar with. It's a form of biofeedback back called heart math.
I love heart
Um,
math.
Her math is great. It's easy, it's inexpensive. You can use it with your Android or your iPhone. And what it does is it syncs your heart rate and your breath and using a visual pacer. So it's a piece of technology which helps you visually to see how the two are syncing. And it's clinically proven to reduce anxiety, depression, and insomnia. And it's super effective. It's awesome. Love it. It's easy.
You wrote a book on teletherapy activities to the teletherapy toolkit, and you also have a resource for parents and therapists and teachers, anybody who is working with kids to help them become more stress resilient. I'm wondering if you could, first of all, tell us where people can get that and give us a taste of what they'll find inside.
Yeah, so I have a resource that is over 100 coping statements that actually anybody can use. And this book is geared for my teletherapy toolkit is geared for kids, the usage of these activities. But you can go to teletherapytoolkitbonus.com and there's over 100 statements to help people cope with stress. So instead of saying, let me help you deal with that for a kid who's like, mommy, I'm worried about going to this baseball game. You can say, wow, the last time you went to the baseball game, you did a great job. What do you think you need to do this time? So it teaches you to reframe because it's those little moments that really help build resiliency. And I think it's so helpful for us as parents to have something to guide what we're saying because we don't know. We're not trained for these things. So there's all different types of clinical conditions. It's something I've been collecting for more than 10 years and it's there, teletherapytoolkitbonus.com. It's a free download.
Awesome. I will make sure that that link gets into the show notes. And I'd also like to mention that at brodywelch.com, I have a couple of resources as well. If you go to brodywelch.com/calm, you can download a free calm and centered bundle, which is two things, which is one, basically me walking you through abdominal breathing to help the body realize that there is no emergency and that it's safe to downshift, and also a super simple qigong exercise that combines breath with movement that is done standing up, which can be nice if you are one of those people where just the idea of sitting still with your thoughts is stressful. I also have a free ebook about biohacks to relieve stress over at brodywelch.com. So we will have both of those links available for people. I'm so impressed with the resource that you've put together. That is, I mean, you're really a teacher of teachers and other therapists, and certainly it seems like such a valuable thing that any parent should have. Roseann Capanna-Hodge, you have been a fabulous guest today. I really appreciate your time and your wisdom.
I love this conversation. So obviously the two of us are super committed to teaching people how to unwind stress and there's so much people can do. So I hope people listen and feel positive.
It's one of the most important things we can do to show up for the people in our lives with presence and capacity is to take care of our own nervous systems. So I appreciate the work that you're doing in the world, and it's certainly a motivating factor in why I do mine. Thanks for listening today. To check out the show notes, get on my email list, or drop me a line, head to brodywelch.com. That's Brody with an IE and Welch with a CH. I'd love to hear from you. If you learned something new or feel inspired to try something different in your life, I'd love for you to pay it forward by sharing this episode with a friend who you think could also benefit. and give them a reason to listen. You'll be helping to create a world where we encourage each other to embody self-respect. Till next time, be good to yourself.